They say grief has a sound. For me, it was silence, deep, endless, echoing through every room of my house. That silence began the morning the hospital called to tell me that my husband, Franklin Jenkins, was gone. They said it was a heart attack, quick and final. I remember sitting there, phone in hand, staring at nothing, not knowing if what I felt was sorrow or something far more complicated. Frank had spent that last weekend, as always, at his lake house, the one place in the world he'd never allowed me to visit. That house had always been his escape, his private kingdom. I used to imagine what it looked like inside. Now, I was about to find out. Frank wasn't a bad man in the obvious way. He didn't yell or hit. His cruelty came dressed in calmness. He controlled everything. What I wore, what I said, how often I saw my sisters. I wasn't a wife. I was an accessory in his perfectly ordered life. For 20 years, I lived by his rules, shrinking smaller with each one. So when he died, my tears at the funeral weren't only for him. They were for the version of me he'd buried long before he ever left this world. A week after the funeral, I began sorting through his things. His closet smelled faintly of cedar and his cologne, sharp and bitter. That's when I found a plastic folder with the lake house deed inside. Neat as everything else in his life. Holding it made me feel both angry and liberated. That house had always been a forbidden symbol, the space he kept apart from me. Now it was mine to enter. I decided I'd drive there one Saturday morning, just once, to see it, to close that chapter myself. The road wound through quiet woods, long stretches of pine trees shadowing my car. When I reached the property, my heart began to race. The gate stood rusted, but the grass was freshly cut. There were tire tracks on the gravel drive, footprints, and letters in the mailbox dated only days before. Someone had been here. With the old key I'd found in his drawer, I stepped inside. The moment I opened the door, I froze. There were clothes hanging near the porch, children's toys on the floor, dishes drying by the sink. A faint smell of cooked food hung in the air. It didn't look like a place recently abandoned. It looked lived in. I took a step forward, and that's when I heard it. Soft footsteps, followed by a woman's voice calling from the hallway. "Frank?" My stomach dropped. That name, spoken so casually, so tenderly, made my skin prickle. Before I could react, the door opened and a young woman appeared, no older than 28, her belly, swollen with pregnancy, strained beneath a light cotton dress. She looked at me, puzzled, wary. "Who are you?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "My name is Aisha Jenkins," I said slowly. "I'm Frank's wife." Her eyes widened, her lips parted, and color drained from her face. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, wordlessly, she stepped aside, motioning me in. Inside, the house felt painfully intimate. There were framed photos of her and Frank at the beach, smiling, as if they had the world ahead of them. A vase of fresh lilies sat on the table, their scent mingling with the quiet hum of a life I never knew existed. I sat down on the sofa while she lowered herself into a chair, one hand on her belly as though protecting her unborn child. When I told her Frank had died a week ago, she gasped, her trembling hands flying to her mouth. She shook her head, eyes filling with tears. "He said he was on a business trip," she whispered. "He was supposed to come back tomorrow." Her name was Simone Hayes. Between sobs, she explained as she had been with Frank for 4 years. He told her he was single, that he traveled for work, which was why he could only visit on weekends. He'd promised her everything, a home, a family, a future. I sat there listening, numb, while she spoke. Her pain was real, raw, and so familiar. She was living the dream he once sold me, only this time the dream was younger, softer, fresher. She looked me in the eyes and said, "I didn't know he was married." I swear I didn't. I believed her. There was no deceit in her voice, only heartbreak. Simone disappeared into a back room and returned with a box. Inside were photos of them together, handwritten notes, and birthday cards signed Love Frank. He looked happy in those pictures, more alive than I'd seen him in years. I traced his smile with my fingertip, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. She showed me a tiny pair of baby booties. "We bought these last week," she said, her voice cracking. "He wanted a son." I wanted to scream, to throw the box across the room, but I didn't. I just sat there, still, my chest heavy, my mind spinning. There were two lives, his and ours, running parallel all these years, never touching, until this moment. Simone kept whispering, "I didn't know. I didn't know," as if the words could undo everything. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. She was a victim too, caught in the same web of lies. For the first time, I saw my own reflection in someone else's pain. Two women, one man, and a house full of ghosts. As I left that evening, the sun was setting over the lake, casting long golden streaks across the water. I realized that whatever I'd thought my life was, it had ended long before Frank's heart ever stopped beating. The truth was, it had ended the moment I'd stopped recognizing myself in it. And now, for the first time, I had the chance to start over. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, my mind replaying Simone's trembling voice. "He wanted a son." The words echoed through the darkness like a cruel joke. Frank had spent years treating me as if I were a burden, claiming he needed peace, space, solitude, and all that time, he had been building another life just miles away from me, one filled with warmth, laughter, and plans for the future. But there was one thing that wouldn't let me rest. Simone's face. That look of shock, confusion, and pain was haunting. She had no one. Pregnant, alone, deceived. I couldn't blame her, not when I knew too well how it felt to live in a man's shadow, believing lies dressed as love. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the stack of bills, letters, and Frank's documents. I didn't want any of it. Not the house, not his money, not the legacy of deceit. Yet something inside me told me I couldn't just walk away and leave that girl. And the innocent life she carried, drowning in the aftermath of his lies. So, the following Saturday, I packed a few bags, baby clothes I'd kept from my niece, some groceries, and a warm blanket, and drove back to the lake house. The road felt less intimidating this time. My hands didn't shake on the wheel. When I knocked, Simone opened the door slowly, her eyes wide with surprise. "I brought some things," I said simply. She didn't speak, but after a few seconds, she stepped aside and let me in. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was full of understanding. We sat at the small wooden table, drinking tea without saying much. I could see how exhaustion had settled into her face, how her eyes looked hollow from crying. "You don't have to talk," I said softly. "I just came to see if you're okay." Her lips trembled. "I don't even know who I am anymore," she whispered. "He said we were a family." I nodded, feeling my throat tighten. "He said the same to me once." She looked up, startled. Then something shifted in her expression, as though realizing we were two sides of the same story. Slowly, her guard lowered. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't owe me anything." "Because you didn't deserve this," I said. "Neither of us did." From that day forward, something changed between us. I helped her pack what few belongings she had and found her a small apartment in Charleston. A quiet studio with sunlight streaming through the windows. When she moved in, I left a note on the kitchen counter. "You're not alone anymore." It didn't take long before word spread. One afternoon, I received a call from Brenda, Frank's sister. Her tone was cold, sharp, dripping with judgment. "I heard you're helping that woman. Have you lost your mind, Aisha? People are talking. You're disgracing Frank's memory." I took a deep breath, letting her words bounce off the armor I had been building inside myself. Frank's memory doesn't need my help to be disgraced, I said quietly and hung up. For the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt peace. I had spent too many years shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. Not anymore. Simone's pregnancy progressed and we kept in touch. I drove her to doctor's appointments, brought her soup when she was sick, and listened when the loneliness crept in. She began to smile again, timidly at first, then with genuine warmth. It wasn't friendship born of pity. It was something deeper, forged through shared pain and mutual healing. Sometimes, when I watched her rub her belly and talk softly to her unborn child, I felt something stir inside me. Not jealousy, but a strange kind of hope. Frank's lies had tied us together, but our courage was what kept us standing. One evening, as we sat on her couch eating takeout, Simone asked me quietly, "Do you ever miss him?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "No," I said. "I missed the woman I was before him." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Me too. The night she went into labor, my phone rang at 6 a.m. Her voice was trembling. "Aisha, it's time. I don't know what to do." I threw on a coat, grabbed her hospital bag, and drove faster than I ever had in my life. She was pale when I found her, gripping the hospital bed rails with both hands, sweat beading on her forehead. I held her hand through every contraction, whispering, "Breathe. You're not alone." Hours later, when her son finally arrived, small, perfect, with a cry that pierced the sterile silence, I felt tears sliding down my cheeks. Simone looked at me with exhaustion and joy. "Do you want to hold him?" she whispered. When I took that tiny boy in my arms, something inside me broke open. For the first time in years, I cried freely, not from grief, but from release. That child born out of deceit was the first honest thing Frank had ever left behind. I looked at Simone and she smiled weakly through her tears. "Thank you for staying," she said. I shook my head. "No," I whispered, cradling the baby close. "Thank you for reminding me what love really looks like." The weeks that followed were a quiet blur of small miracles. Simone settled into her new apartment, and I began visiting her regularly. She was nervous at first, always apologizing for the mess, for taking up my time, for needing help. But slowly, she stopped apologizing. She started laughing again, eating better, sleeping more. I'd often find her sitting by the window, humming softly as she rocked her baby. The boy, she named him Samuel, had Frank's eyes, dark, searching, intense. But when I looked into them, I didn't see Frank. I saw a new beginning neither of us had planned, but both of us needed. It didn't take long for gossip to find its way back to me. Brenda, my late husband's sister, seemed determined to make me feel ashamed. One afternoon she called again. "You're humiliating yourself, Aisha," she snapped. "Taking care of her? The woman who ruined your marriage? People are talking." I listened quietly, waiting for her to finish. "You know what, Brenda?" I said softly. "Let them talk." I spent 20 years worrying about what people thought. It nearly killed me. I'm done living for their approval. After I hung up, I realized something. My silence had once been a cage. Now, it was my choice. When Samuel turned 1 month old, Simone invited me to a small dinner. She'd cooked despite her exhaustion, and when I walked in, she greeted me with the warmest smile I'd ever seen. "You're family now," she said shyly. That word, family, used to feel heavy. That night, it felt light again. I decided to sell the lake house shortly after. I couldn't bear to see it again, not even from afar. The realtor came by to take photos, and as I handed him the keys, I felt no nostalgia, only relief. That house had been the symbol of secrets and lies, but it no longer had power over me. It was time to let it go. When I told Simone, she grew quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You've been braver than you know." Her words stayed with me. For years, I had mistaken endurance for strength. Now, I realized real strength wasn't in staying. It was in leaving and choosing peace over pride. A few months later, on a warm afternoon in Charleston, I decided to take control of my healing. I found a therapist named Dr. Monroe and booked my first session. I didn't go there because I was broken. I went because I wanted to understand why I'd accepted so little for so long. The first few sessions were difficult. I spoke about things I'd buried deep, how Frank's control had made me doubt my worth, how I'd mistaken fear for loyalty. But with each session, I felt lighter. Dr. Monroe once told me, survival isn't healing, Aisha. Healing is choosing to stop surviving and start living. Those words became my anchor. At her suggestion, I joined a women's support group downtown. I remember walking in the first time, hesitant and small. The room was filled with women of all ages, some with tears in their eyes, others quietly listening. No one asked me to explain myself. I didn't have to defend my pain. For the first time, I felt understood without saying a word. Each week I shared a little more. The shame I'd carried for years began to dissolve. I realized that what I'd gone through wasn't rare. It was simply unspoken. We were all women who had lost parts of ourselves in someone else's story and were now trying to reclaim our voices. One evening after the meeting, I stayed behind to clean up. A man with kind eyes and silver hair approached me. "I think I've seen you here before," he said with a gentle smile. His name was Thomas Miller, Tom, a widower who attended grief sessions at the same center. He asked if he could walk me to my car, and as we talked, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: ease. Over the next few weeks, we kept crossing paths, sometimes by coincidence, sometimes not. He never pushed, never asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. We'd sit on the same park bench after meetings, sharing quiet moments, sipping coffee. With Tom, silence didn't feel oppressive, it felt safe. He told me about his wife, gone 3 years now, and how he still reached for her side of the bed some nights. I told him about Frank, about the betrayal, about Simone and the baby. He didn't interrupt, didn't pity me. He just listened. And for the first time, I realized what love could look like when it wasn't built on fear or control, when it didn't demand that I shrink. There were no grand gestures, no fiery romance, just calm understanding and small, consistent kindness. He never tried to fix me. He simply sat beside me, letting me exist freely, without judgment. And slowly, without even noticing when it began, I started to heal. Tom became a quiet rhythm in my life. He didn't rush me, didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He simply showed up, steady, reliable, gentle. After years of living under the shadow of control and deceit, that kind of calm felt like sunlight breaking through after a long storm. We spent our days doing small, ordinary things that somehow felt extraordinary. Walking through the park, cooking simple dinners together, sitting on the porch as the Charleston breeze drifted through the evening air. For once, there were no expectations. No tension, no fear of saying the wrong thing. With him, silence wasn't a wall. It was peace. Months passed, and our connection deepened in quiet ways. One afternoon, we were sitting in this backyard raking leaves as the sun began to dip behind the magnolia trees. Tom straightened up, leaned on his rake, and looked at me with that calm gaze I'd grown to trust. "You know," he said softly, "we could make this something more permanent if you want." There was no kneeling, no ring hidden in a box, just sincerity. I felt tears sting my eyes, not from surprise, but from recognition. After years of being told what to do, someone was finally asking me what I wanted. And I realized I did. We married in a small ceremony behind his home, surrounded only by the people who mattered. Simone was there, holding little Samuel in her arms. My sister stood by my side, her eyes shining with pride. There were no expensive decorations or speeches, only truth and quiet joy. When Tom took my hand, I didn't feel like a woman starting over. I felt like a woman finally standing in the life she'd chosen. Simone and I remained close. She lived a few blocks away, and Samuel grew up like one of my own. He had Frank's eyes, yes, but they didn't hold the same darkness. They were brighter, curious, full of life. Watching Simone grow into motherhood, strong, patient, and determined, made me proud. I realized that out of all the lies Frank had built, something pure had still managed to emerge. A child who would never know deceit, only love. As time passed, Tom and I built our own little family. 2 more children arrived, a daughter who inherited my quiet determination, and a son with Tom's gentle heart. Our house became filled with the sounds of laughter, the smell of fresh bread, and music floating from the radio on Saturday mornings. Sometimes I'd stand by the window, watching my children play in the yard, and think about how far I had come. There had been a time when I couldn't imagine life beyond survival, when I believed peace was something meant for other people. Now peace lived inside me. There were still moments of reflection, moments when I'd think about Frank. Not with love, not even with hate, but with distance. He was a part of my story, but no longer the author of it. For years I had carried the weight of his choices, his lies, his absence. But with time I learned to see them differently. He didn't ruin me. He revealed the parts of me I had forgotten existed. The strength, the courage, the ability to rebuild. Forgiving him didn't mean excusing what he'd done. It meant releasing the grip his memory had over me. Sometimes, on quiet nights after everyone had gone to bed, I'd sit at my desk and write. I wrote about the silence I endured, the secrets I uncovered, the women I met, myself included, who found power in speaking up. Writing became my way of remembering without reopening wounds. It reminded me that even the most painful stories could become seeds of growth if you were brave enough to face them. Years later, Simone still visited often. She'd drop by with Samuel and a basket of muffins, and we'd sit on the porch watching the children play. Our bond had evolved from shared pain into genuine friendship. She once told me, "You were the first person who didn't turn away from me." I smiled and answered, "That's because I saw myself in you." Our children grew up calling each other cousins. They didn't share blood, but they shared love, and that was stronger. Whenever I saw them running barefoot through the grass, I thought of the chain of choices that had led to this peace. Painful ones, necessary ones, brave ones. Each decision had carved a path that brought me here. Now, at 46, I wake up every morning to the soft hum of life around me, the sound of birds outside the window, the warmth of Tom's hand beside mine, the quiet laughter of children getting ready for school. My home smells of coffee and cinnamon, and every corner tells a story not of survival, but of rebirth. I no longer live in the shadow of someone else's will. I live in my own truth. I've learned that starting over isn't about forgetting what broke you. It's about using the pieces to build something stronger. If my story has taught me anything, it's that love without freedom is just another form of prison, and that sometimes losing everything you thought defined you is the only way to discover who you truly are. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so I can keep bringing more life stories like this. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.